Hi everyone, my name's Cleo. I'm an American reader based out of Dublin, Ireland. My glasses are filthy. And like every other basic bitch, I have, of course, watched A Night of Seven Kingdoms. And one, fantastic show. Loved it. Um, but another thing, my glasses are no more clean. We're gonna rock with it. Something I noticed when I was watching it is I could think of a lot of book series that I'd read that I loved that were set in a pseudo-medieval period, or pseudo-medieval setting. And it made me wonder, why is this the most popular setting? And so I'm going to talk about it a little bit today. Um, so yeah, if you are interested in hearing me talk about things that I'm not an expert on, but I'm certainly interested in, buckle up. Right, guys, so before we get started, I want to talk about why I haven't posted in so long. I'm so sorry. I'm actually posting this after having filmed the whole thing, so I am a bit knackered. Um, but I want to explain that. Well, my laptop shat itself. The graphics card killed itself. So I had to get a new laptop. I have a new laptop. I love my new laptop. It's great. However, I have yet to be able to recover the footage from when I was back at my parents' house for Christmas from the hard drive, which I will be able to do next week. So I should hypothetically have the video that I filmed while in the States soon. That one was a video about my top reads of 2025. Um, I'll have to take a look at the footage and see if it's good. If it hasn't like gotten fucked. But if it hasn't, I'll post that. If not, oh well. Um, but yes. Um, that's why my laptop killed itself. So I had to get a new one. Um, Yay. But anyway, with that out of the way, I will let you get back to me from an hour and a half ago. God. Um, I let you hear her start telling you about medieval history. So, like I said, so many books are set in medieval period or a pseudo-medieval period. Not just A Song of Ice and Fire, of course. Um, I will add, I have not read the Song of Ice and Fire books. However, my lovely friend Dylan is a huge fan, and so I've absorbed them mostly by osmosis. But I just dug around through all of my books here, and I was like, let's see how many fantasy books set in a pseudo medieval period I can find. We'll see how many I can find. Right? Okay. So I've got a stack of books here. My hand is sitting on top of it. We are at shoulder height. My shoulder's actually like lifting out. That's how many books I found. And this is not all of them. This is just what I could dig out without toppling down the precariously piled cart back here and my double stacked bookcase. Um, but The Witcher, one of my favorite series in the whole wide world. I was also thinking about this kind of stuff because of the Witcher 3 DLC that's being like whispered about, and the fact that The Witcher 4 is currently in development. I'm so excited, guys. I'm so excited. Oh my god. For anyone who doesn't know, this is my favorite series ever. I've been playing The Witcher 3 since I was 13. Way too young. I'm well aware. Don't even get me started. Don't blame my parents. They had no idea what's in the game. They still don't because I refuse to play the story when they're in the house. Um, they're not seeing Geralt in his braze. I'm so sorry. I love my parents. I'm not doing that to them. Hell to the no. Um, but one of my first cosplays was Dandelion, my lovely boy. I'm going to show you my most recent imp photos of him because I refuse to show you the first version of him. If you really want to look, it's still on my Instagram, but this is the most recent version of him I've done. I want to cosplay him again. I love him. He is somewhat of an amalgamation between the show, the books, and the game, and the games. So, but he's my boy. He's my precious boy. I want to cosplay him again. I have to. So yes, this this series. But yeah, Dandelion was my first cosplay. So if you've come to hear through my cosplay stuff on my Instagram, and TikTok, except I have no TikTok drafts anymore because my phone was stolen last year and all of my VNCon drafts are gone. Um, but if you come to me through cosplay, you know I love this series with a fiery passion. But pseudo-medieval. Where am I gonna put these without blocking my lighting? Because I've already blocked my lighting here. Okay, just go in there. It's fine. The World of the White Rat by T. Kingfisher. This is all pseudo-medieval. This is very pseudo-medieval. Complete with wars. It's very good. I love this series. This is just the book that I had in my grasp. This is my current read. Someone You Can Build a Nest In. This is an eldritch horror romance, lesbian romance novel. I know, I have a very specific type of books. I'm loving this book, by the way, guys. I'm about halfway through. I love gay people. It's great. It's great. Prairie of the Orange Tree, ostensibly about the Targaryens. I'm joking. I'm joking. Please don't kill me. Please don't kill me. But Prairie of the Orange Tree, literally about religion and dragons and the medieval period. Come on, guys. Come on. This is like the obvious one. To be like in that sort of like medieval period. Complete with queens and swords and all that good stuff. Where am I putting this? My desk is getting full, guys. I'm really scared. Something's gonna fall over. My most recent read, Not for the Faint of Heart, a Robin Hood retelling, which Robin Hood is inherently set in the medieval period. So, this is obviously set in the medieval period, specifically medieval England, because this is technically historical fantasy in a way that the rest of these are not. But still set medieval England. So, please don't fall over. I just have everything stacked up like underneath my lights here. On top of my laptop, I should add. I'm so scared. Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. This one, as I understand it, to be more Viking oriented than some of these other books, which are much more oriented towards the English medieval period, towards the English medieval period, or in the case of The Witcher, Polish. Ed and Cleo here. I have come in with a small correction about this. Prairie of the Orange Tree is, because I have Dylan, who's standing just off the camera here, who has corrected me about what I just said here. Prairie of the Orange Tree is set more towards the Silk Road, so the Near East, quote unquote. If we want to be historically accurate to the terminology, but like Turkey and India and that kind of thing. So with some European influence as well. So not quite. I would put that more towards Holy Roman Empire, medieval period, in the European influence. But early modern, fuck off. Again, he's a medievalist. He's a fucking asshole. But again, that puts it more towards Silk Road and more towards the Middle East and the Near East, and North Africa, just to be clear. Just as a correction. Again, I'm not the medievalist. Fat-ass McGee is. So we're going to trust his judgment on this. I will let you go back to me from yesterday to continue telling you about Shadow of the Gods. But it is still set during that like sort of time period. And the Vikings were active at the same time as the medieval period. So I'm counting it. I'm counting it close enough. Just because the time frame matches. Which means that a lot of the places that that the Vikings would be raiding would be in fact, in that period. I have not read this yet. This book was thrust upon me. This book was thrust upon me by Dylan, who fucking loves this series. And so I'm counting it. I'm counting it just because of the time period fits, and also because Viking era, medieval period. These are both like really commonly mixed up in this kind of like fantasy period. I am kind of using medieval period, and I know that I'm gonna get some flack from Dylan about this because Dylan is a medievalist. I should add, Dylan is a medievalist. I'm going to get fucking flayed alive. It's fine. Um, but I am using it as a shorthand for this kind of like historical period, specifically Western historical period. Correction, once again, from fuck-ass McGee, the medievalist here. I was correct to use medieval as an umbrella term. This is actually how it's used. I'm so proud of myself for knowing basic information. It is in fact used as an umbrella term to cover about 1,000 years, you said? Which is from like the 900s. When is it from? Like 400 to like the 1500s. So 15, 16, 1600s. So I was correct. Yay, I love being right about things. I will not, in fact, get flayed alive. Yay! Yet. I could do a whole other video on the wuxia genre and like its derivations by AAPI and Asian diaspora authors. I could totally do like a video which would have a lot of the same points I should add, but would be platforming just books by Asian authors. But I could very easily do something about that. But I'm specifically keeping this to European, you know, west of the Caucasus kind of stuff, just because west of the Caucasus, north of Gibraltar, kind of stuff. Just because it's easier for me to conceptualize it that way. So I'm gonna count this in that, even though it's not set in the same sort of like classical medieval, and I'm gonna talk about what, and I'll talk about that in more depth when I get to it. But so before you're in the comments being like, that's medieval, that's not medieval, that's Viking, that's not medieval, that's Viking. I know. I'm counting it because it fits the same pattern. Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. Again, this was thrust upon me by Dylan. I think you'll find that Dylan thrusts a lot of books upon me and is like, you have to read these fucking books. And I'm a simple man, I say yes. But this one is definitely in that sort of like, it's definitely medieval. Like, it's, you know, the Kingdom of the Six Duchies. You know, it's, you know. And I'm just skimming through this and I'm like, man, these are English-ass names in here. These are really fucking classically English names. Not English in the like John Smith sense, but English in like the holdovers from Cornish, from Welsh, from Scottish, like holdovers from Brittany, like kind of like things. Like that is what I'm seeing in these. Like proper English names. Which is really funny. I think this is so funny, just looking at this and be like, wow, this is deeply English. So, of course, and also look at the styling of it, like, look at that crest, that is a... Oh god, the light's blowing out so badly, I'm gonna just cover the light here, get past the light, like, that is the most fucking English-ass crest I've ever seen in my life. Also, classical calligraphy styling of the medieval period. Like, this one goes in hard on the aesthetics of it, so, you know. 2 more books, guys, 2 more. Mistborn Era 1, as I'm currently reading. Oh god, she's so blown out from the lighting. Hero of Ages is the one I'm currently on, so this is the one I'm grabbing. But yes, Mistborn Era 1 is very much meant to be pseudo-medieval. Mistborn Era 2 is cowboys. I'm so excited for Mistborn Era 2. Alex keeps going, you're gonna love Era 2, you're gonna love the cowboys, and I'm like, I know, but also I don't want to finish this book because I read the last page. I read the last page, guys. Alex hates the fact that sometimes I'll just like skim the last like 50 pages. of a book, and he's like, "Why do you do this?" And I'm like, I think it's fun. It's fun. Leave me alone." But yes, this is definitely pseudo medieval, and I I would actually, instead of putting this as English, I would almost put this at Holy Roman Empire. But just like, I can't tell is the thing, because I'm looking at a lot of these like place names, and you can kind of guesstimate how people are figuring out these, like, or like what they're using as a reference point. I very much think that this definitely could be English, but the problem is that some of these names are Germanic. Not totally Germanic, but some of them are. And I can't tell if this is like meant to be post-Anglo-Saxon, um, or Brittany. If this is meant to be like, but it's certainly medieval. And I mean, English feudalism was influenced by a lot of other factors, and the names in England are a bit varied because of the constantly being invaded and then later doing all the invading. So, you know, you know, the sort of influence of groups that like seem to be akin to the Islamic Empire suggests Holy Roman. This is again me thinking a little too hard. These are clearly just someone being like, how did this work in the medieval period? This is clearly Sanderson just going, how did this work in medieval period? Into Google, and getting into I like thinking too hard, guys. Please don't fall over, oh my god. Ah! Okay. And last but not least, of the books that I pulled out, Legends and Lattes, of course. Um, this is just, this is just, I knew something would fall! Okay. It's fine. It's just my can of, contact cement for cosplay making, for prop making. I got it! I knew something would fall. Legend. Okay. Legends and Lattes, which is of course, I just heard something like, and I can't tell if it was outside or on my desk. um, Guys, I've forgotten my brain. Legend of the Lattes. Very obviously medieval fanfic. This is just medieval fanfic. You know, this is basically D&D world, which is always pseudo-medieval, which I also want to talk about Faerun, and why Faerun and pseudo-medieval is, like, the thing in D&D, and it goes into this sort of stuff as well. It's for the same reason that these books are all, like, really popularly, like, fantasy. Like, pseudo-medieval fantasy. Of course, we also have the classic, you know, the man who, the man who made the modern Western epic fantasy in the form of J.R.R. Tolkien. Like, yeah, Lord of the Rings is pseudo-medieval, like, I don't know what to tell you. Pseudo-medieval, I mean, even he would say it is, per his own timeline. Considering that Lord of the Rings is also meant to be an alternative history. So, and then, of course, the Song of Ice and Fire. Game of Thrones, is very classically, medieval fantasy, complete with all the vim and vigor of medieval history. And I had I obviously watched A Knight of Seven Kingdoms, and I had mentioned to Dylan I wanted to make a video about this thing, about the fact that like the pseudo-medieval period is like so popular for fiction, specifically fantasy. And again, like I said, he's a medievalist, and I'm gonna read some of the messages he sent. So he said, fun little tidbit. Medieval settings in literature is popular. The study of medieval history is lacking. This is pretty fair, I would say. I mean, I know two different medievalists, Dylan, of course, and then I know another one. Her name is Daniela, and they are both medievalists, but also being medievalists, they focus very narrowly on something very specific. Dylan focuses on the um, original English occupation of Ireland. Like that is his thing, like singular thing. He focuses on medieval Ireland. Full stop. He focuses on the politics of the High Kings, which inherently means that sometimes it's something of a war historian, but not nearly as much as like someone who is dedicated to the history of war. Just has to be because everyone's fist fighting out here. But Daniela, her speciality is Arthurian legend, full stop. Like, that is enough that she is a medievalist specializing in Arthurian legend. Period. Right? So, when you are a medievalist, you narrow in very, very, very hard because there is so much we don't know that if you do not set your mind to it and set a like a fence for yourself, you'll just be in the weeds. It took Dylan months to figure out his dissertation question because he's working on his dissertation right now. And it took him months to figure it out. Oh, I was inundated with, I'm gonna do this. No, I'm gonna do this. No, I don't know what I want to do. No, I have like 5 things I could do for my dissertation question. Just note that I have no idea about any of this. I know about this by osmosis. But, I do know enough about this from just context and stuff like that, to know that Victorians romanticized and brutalized and barbarianized the medieval period in equal measure, right? They brought up this idea of chivalry and beauty and all this kind of stuff and like glory, um, and which wasn't inherently true. Code of chivalry was sure a thing for knights, but I mean, we know what men who take oaths will do. They'll act like their oath protects them. Men have always been men, what can I say? But also, the Victorians made it out to be a lot bloodier and more brutal than it was. For example, a lot of the torture methods, the medieval torture methods, are entirely Victorian inventions. The Iron Maiden, for example. Now, this is just me spitballing and like thinking about what I know about burial methods during the Victorian period. The Iron Maiden looks an awful lot like a coffin, like a coffin at the time. If you've seen Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, that coffin that Clara is in when she's buried, Frankenstein's mother is in when she dies, that is period accurate. That is a thing. That is a thing. They had coffins like that. And Iron Maiden looks an awful lot like one of those coffins. My suspicion, and I have not looked this up. I've not looked this up. I'm sure editing me will insert here with what the actual truth is. So, I was correct. They are coffins. I was right to just use some basic pattern recognition. So I have a source here. I will put it in the description, so you can read it as well. But scholars such as Stephen Bull and Alice Rio, presumably they are anthropologists or archaeologists, I have not looked, have demonstrated that the supposed medieval Iron Maiden devices were either modern inventions or elaborate hoaxes. Many were crafted using iron coffins or sarcophagi from the Renaissance or even later periods. I was right. I was right. I love having basic pattern recognition. Retrofitted with spikes and displayed as medieval instruments of cruelty. The myth was further perpetuated by 19th century authors and dramatists, embedding the Iron Maiden in the public imagination as a symbol of medieval barbarity. Like I said, the Victorians really liked to demonize and barbarize the medieval period because they were so pure, don't you know? They were so pure. They were so pure and they never did anything wrong ever. Anyway, back to me from yesterday. But it would not shock me by any stretch if it was just someone who was dicking about with an old coffin. If it was just some dicking about with a spare coffin that didn't get sold. Like, it wouldn't shock me. At all. Additionally, it is notable that there are only certain areas that have a lot of research done or have a lot of sources done. This is because of language differences, how language has changed, calligraphy stylings, ink types. Oh, is it in Latin? Um, what kind? Like all this kind of stuff. Because you have to learn about, and again, I'm referring to Dylan's messages here because this is something he knows and told me about. Medieval sources also require you to know a specific style of writing and calligraphy. Latin, Old Irish, because again he specializes in medieval Ireland, or any other dead language or older version of a language. They're likely damaged from water, faded, etc., whereas more modern are more likely to be typed. This is fair. Also, modern paper has is generally acid treated archival paper, especially for important documents. It's going to be acid treated. It's going to be archival. This is super important because this means the paper doesn't fade or crease or edge too much. It will still degrade over time, but it will not degrade nearly as much. This is important. Now, places where the Catholic Church had a really strong foothold, you may have a better shot of having some decent stuff because you will be able to, because the Latin, like a lot of stuff will be done in two different languages. It'll be done in the local language and it'll be done in Latin. So you have double the chance of something existing. But especially in England and the places that, and what was once the Holy Roman Empire. So Germany, I don't remember exactly what was in the Holy Roman Empire. I know Germany was in it. Austria, Hungary, that area, that sort of Central Europe area. Because the Catholic Church was so prominent, you would have a higher chance of having some stuff just because it was written twice usually, once for the clergy and once for the people. Additionally, it's hard to access some of these sources. For example, Irish sources, which this is Dylan's consistent gripe, is the fact that he has to often go into places to view sources that not a lot of them have been digitized. So if there's not a ton of demand for the research, it will often not be digitized. This is also why England and the places in the Holy Roman Empire often have better stuff, because a lot of times people will get into medieval history in the Holy Roman Empire period just because of this is horrible. It's ties to World War I and World War II because the downfall of the Holy Roman Empire is directly tied to World War I and then World War II, of course. So a lot of times people get into it because they're interested in World War I or World War II. Just because a fall of the Holy Roman Empire leads to all of these fracturing kingdoms and duchies and all this kind of stuff. And then from there, the Prussian Empire is born out of its ashes, and then you get World War I. So lovely. That's for one thing. But another though is just climate. Ireland has a lot more bogs. Just as a full on it's true. Ireland has a lot more bogs. It's a lot more humid. England is obviously humid as well, as is a lot of Central Europe, but not nearly as humid as Ireland because it takes, and I'm pulling this out of my head, but I believe the number is 290 wet days per year to maintain a bog, which means it rains almost every day somewhere in Ireland, which means that, and paper and wet do not mix. They do not mix. No, 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 no. So, well, shit, nothing there. It also doesn't help that, the English invaded Ireland multiple times, which may have led to some loss of documents and sites and artifacts. We know that some of the forts were not treated properly by the Vikings, by the English. There very much have been churches that have just kind of been exploded. by invasion here, there, everywhere. Because Ireland first, the first would have been the Romans, then would have been the Vikings, then would have been the English. I'm sure there was another invasion in there somewhere that I don't remember. um, wouldn't shock me. But yeah, so a lot of this is like very locationally based. So I can't say for certain that any of this is accurate to anywhere else. It might not be accurate to anywhere else in Europe, um, in anywhere really. Um, but it is certainly accurate to the places we have sources from, which are again the former Holy Roman Empire and England. So, also another reason for those is because German and English have like changed in a way that has been tracked over time. So they're a lot easier. The old version of the language is a lot easier to translate. So, but again, we still know a ton about all this kind of stuff. Like, it's not like the medieval period and the Renaissance and all that kind of stuff in Italy are like a mystery to us. It's just that when people when people want to write about medieval stuff, they want to write about feudalism. And all of our sources of feudalism and how feudalism worked for the people are often stuck in the Holy Roman Empire and in England. So you can't say for certain that any of this is accurate to how it was for anywhere else, really. So that's an important thing to know, is that this is all deeply like English, in a lot of ways, unless you're local to some of it, which please don't fall. Terrified. Which is how you get Andrzej Sapkowski, a Polish author of The Witcher. Now, Andrzej wrote a very Polish book. These books are very Polish. All the names are Polish. Well, they're transcripted into English, but they're distinctly Polish names. Eskil, right? Vilgefortz, Yennefer, Vesemir. Like, these names are distinctly European, is what I'll say. Like, Eastern European. But also, you see it in the cultural aspect of it. Geralt bathes a lot for a regular-ass common guy. And it is a distinct feature of these books that baths are readily available, oftentimes even in inns. This is because of Polish history. This is because of it's Poland. And also, yes, the people here are canonically Polish. How it works is during the conjunction of spheres, their like conjunction eats an entire town in medieval Poland and dumps them out on the continent in the northern kingdoms. And so you just end up with a bunch of Poles. I do believe that Nilfgaard in the south were plucked from the Iberian Peninsula and France. Were plucked from France and the Iberian Peninsula. I think they're meant. I think the implication is that they're Basque, but I can't say for sure. But I do know for a fact that they are implied to be from somewhere in the Iberian Peninsula, that area, which could be Spain, Portugal, Basque region. Anyway, back to the bathing. The fact that Geralt bathes a lot is a distinctly Polish thing. Poland has always had a large population of Jewish people just because they've had a higher tolerance for like religious sects. They often took in exiled Jews throughout history, so Poland has always just had a high Jewish population, whether culturally or religiously. They've always had a high population. This means that there is actually a specific thing that they do or did at the time that's different from everyone else around them. Do you know what that is? I'll give you a couple seconds to figure it out while I look up the name of the thing. Did you guess? It's hygiene. Two things. One, Jewish people performed halacha, I think is how it's pronounced. Halacha, which is the equivalent to, say, the Islamic wudu, right? It is cleaning. It is ritual washing. Additionally, the native Poles, were much more inclined towards bathing because that part of that religious tolerance was the fact that they were mostly pagan. They were mostly pagan. They were not colonized by the church yet. And so a lot of them still participated in their own pagan traditions, which often involved bathhouses. Again, cleaner. Cleaner. The more clean you were, the less likely you were to get sick. Also, again, being closer to pagan, they had more cats, which meant the cats hunted a lot more rats, which meant there were a lot less fleas, which meant a lot less Black Death. Jumping in to add something here, the other reason why Poland was so well protected from the plague is because the king in Poland at the time, Casimir the Great, had a really, really good and strict quarantining policy. The only other place um, in Europe at the time that had such a good quarantine policy was the Kingdom of Milan. And so that's actually where the word quarantine comes from. It comes from the Milano word for 20, which was a 20-day quarantine. 20-day, like, you don't talk to anybody, you don't see anybody, blah, blah. And so everyone coming in and out of Milan was quarantined for 20 days, which meant that the plague didn't get in. And the same thing happened in Poland, for the most part. Which is why, another reason why the plague didn't really get a good foothold, even though there were people coming and going from Poland, because they would be required to quarantine for 20 days, give or take. And so they would show signs of if they were infected and then be able to be moved to sick houses or allowed in at the end of it. So that's the other reason. Because quarantining. Casimir the Great did a lot of good quarantining, so that's the other thing. So it's not just hygiene, it's a combination of hygiene and being like, well, if you are sick, we will know in a few days. So you're going to stay here, and we'll let you in when we know you're not sick. So that's fun. Which also means that they had a sense of what an incubation period is. But that's a topic for another video. That's a topic for an infection rate video, which this is not. So you see in The Witcher, a lot of cats, a lot of bathing. Right? And so, this is one of the cases in which, like, local knowledge definitely won out in that case. Like, for example, if I were to write a book about medieval, like a medieval fantasy book, it would probably end up looking a lot more like Irish medieval history, just because I would have access to those resources. Andrzej Sapkowski had access to resources on the Polish medieval period specifically. And so here we are with a culture that doesn't remember why they bathed a lot, but they certainly remember that they bathed a lot. So they bathe a lot, And I think that's really fun because while most medieval people, and again, this is specific to, I think this is specifically English, that I can specifically point this to, but the idea of sickness was that it was about bad smells, right? So medieval people were pretty clean as well. Like, medieval people were clean, but they weren't clean enough for the Black Death, if that makes any sense. People in the medieval period, in England anyway, thought that miasma spread disease. Bad smell, bad air. Miasma means bad air. And it was basically the bad smells. Not a bad frame of reference here, because, like, yeah, most things that spread disease smell pretty rank. You know not to eat something because it smells off, right? Shit smells, piss smells, rot smells, food that's gone off smells. Like, not to eat something or drink something because it's gone off, because it smells like it's off, right? So it's not a terrible thought. A lot of things that carry disease, are vectors for disease, smell bad. The problem is that it's not the smell, it's the little bitty microbes that are making that smell. So you end up with this sort of thing of like, yeah, they washed their hands. Not every time they went for a piss, though. They would do it if they got piss on their hands. Or shit on their hands, right? They would do it if they were dirty visibly. That's not enough. And also, additionally, the Black Plague was spread through fleas. You gotta bathe regularly for that, and if you can't afford to, or there's no ritualistic reason or religious reason to do so, you're not gonna do it. Especially not the common people. right? But in a country where, the done thing religiously and like culturally was to bathe, you'd make it work, right? But if it was the kind of thing of like you're a farmer, you're a serf, you're kind of too busy for it. There's no cultural reason for it. So your lord isn't gonna like set aside like an hour a day for you to bathe, for all the serfs to bathe. You're not gonna do it. You're not gonna be able to, right? So while medieval people were often quite clean, at least once you got into like some minor titles, if you didn't have a title, you might not have the time because it was not a cultural thing. It was a health thing. Um, it wasn't a religious thing. It was a health thing. So it wouldn't necessarily be cared for in the same way, if that makes any sense. So that's another thing, is that like sometimes these are often localized. These sort of like fantasy settings are localized. And again, I've named a lot of these that are based off of English history for the most part, like English medieval period for the most part. Um, this one is of course Polish. Oh, there's Polish. The book was written in Polish. It's obviously going to be Polish, but it is distinctive to note the differences. Geralt bathes a lot. He specifically likes bathing a lot, and it is something that he will fork out his last coin that he could use to help himself to bathe. Because it is that important. Because culturally it was that important at the time that these people would have fallen through in the conjunction. Another thing. Going back to The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. Again, this is Norse. Viking. Viking-esque. This is Viking, kind of Viking fantasy. But again, it comes back down to this sort of romanticization of the past that people really like. And again, it makes it different from the rest of these. For one, it makes it a little bit more normal for the main character, I believe, one of the main characters at least, is a woman. And it makes it a lot more normal for her to be doing stuff with weapons, because that was kind of accepted at the time. Um, the Norse and Viking laws around marriage and stuff like that were pretty in favor of women for the most part. Obviously, you know, you know, um, history's never been kind to women, but the Vikings were a lot more kind to women in that regard. And so, like, specifically calling this book out in that regard, um, like, gives a lot more leeway for a female character to be tough, you know? Um, but also, again, it's a world that we like to read about. Like, people like to know about the Vikings. People like the Vikings, and they have an idea about the Vikings, even if it's incorrect, Um, they have notions about the Vikings. And so, again, it makes it a good setting, and it makes it also really good to market, really easy to market, because people are going to see Viking and are going to go, oh, I have to read that. I have to read that. It's Vikings. It's Vikings. I love Vikings. I love Vikings. Um, So again, it's that kind of thing of like, people have a sense of it. And I want to go back to romanticization real quick, because again, I've already said about the Victorians romanticizing the medieval period. They also kind of romanticized the Vikings a lot. And we still romanticize the Vikings a lot. But it's in a very odd way. Um, a lot of the stuff, like a lot of the like face paint traditions and stuff like that, and those are not Viking. A lot of the hairstyles are not inherently Viking. Like, there's some specific things that are like very odd, and are not Viking. But a lot of these things are much more akin to, weirdly enough, to like, I like a lot of like the face paint and stuff like that, and like the marks. I've seen like people do depictions of like Viking women, like Vikings with like lines on their chins. It looks like Maori. Like, it looks like Maori tattoos. And that I know there's a word for it. I know I don't remember it off the top of my head. I'm sorry. Um, but it looks more like indigenous Americas, indigenous, you know, um, Australia, indigenous New Zealanders, indigenous Kiwis. Like, it looks more like indigenous populations. And I feel weird about that. It feels like there is something to be said there about racism, and I don't know enough about the topic to actually make that argument. I feel like someone who is more informed than me could definitely make that argument. Um, but again, period that is romanticized again, and I brought in this book and I brought in The Witcher as like sort of like more localized versions and also slightly different from the rest, because the rest of these are English, you know. The rest of these are sort of like based off of like the English medieval period, with a smattering of the Gutenberg Bible in there, with a smattering of like the printing press and shit like that in there, which again, that's why I bring up the Holy Roman Empire. And I will get to the Gutenberg press, the printing press, in a minute, because that is an interesting one. But again, a period of time that is very heavily romanticized, again, in a different way, but in a very weird, weird way. And sometimes you'll, talk to people who, have notions about Vikings, and they'll be, so insistent, and you're like, no, no. Um, like, it's relevant, in Ireland, because the Vikings invaded Ireland. Dublin is called Dublin because of the Vikings, you know? Baia sounds nothing like Dublin, right? But Dublin is the name that it was given by Vikings using the Asquelga, but from the Vikings, Baia comes after that, or it comes before after, but it comes outside of the Viking establishment of the port. The Vikings established the port. Whether Baia is already there or not is not something I know off the top of my head. But Dublin was founded by the Vikings because they needed a port. And they got a port. They got their port, If you wanted to be High King, you took Dublin. That kind of thing. So, it's relevant. It's relevant to know about the Vikings. But people have, notions about what they are, I'm trying to imply something here, and I'm just going to say it outright because I think I should. It depends on if it's a man or a woman romanticizing it. I'm going to be so for real. The men romanticize it in the war way. You know the way. You know the one. The women romanticize periods of history normally. Normally for me. Me, AFAB. Obviously, I think it's normal. But men romanticize periods of history with war. Women tend to do it with more cultural stuff, I think that's important to clarify. But yes, again, even with something that is not actually English pseudo-medieval, the same pattern applies. We think something's cool, and so it's easy to sell and also really popular. God of War? Anyone? The new one, I should say. What about Assassin's Creed Valhalla? I love Assassin's Creed. Those were really great games. And they banked on the fact that people would see Vikings and go, hell yeah. Which meant that, one, they could have a really good game, but also meant that they didn't really have to worry about if this really good game would sell. It was a really good game. They were really good games in really good series set around the Norse gods and the Vikings. Come on, man, it's cool. It's the kind of thing that people love. People love the Norse gods. People love the Vikings. So it makes it really easy to make something good with that, but also it makes it really easy to be like, I am not going to sink a bunch of shit ton of time into this and not get a payoff and not get my time back. You know what I mean? So I think that's also an important thing to know, is that sometimes these settings are picked. And again, I'm not saying this to to shit on any of these authors. These authors are all great. But there is definitely something appealing about these when, one, the market is saturated with these, so this is a lot of what people have read, right? I mean, I'm fucking guilty of this too. I'm working on a fucking pseudo-medieval fantasy series. I'm working on a pseudo-medieval fantasy series. I am no better than these authors. I want to be totally clear here. This is not me, like, trying to shit on any of these authors. These authors are great. This is more me, like, picking apart why this is so popular, right? You know? Um, and I do genuinely believe it is because it's, one, like, what people know, whether it's in the zeitgeist, the Victorians, from historians, from history shows, that kind of thing, or from what they're already reading, which is probably historical fantasy. A lot of people read historical fantasy, and if you are writing historical fantasy, you're probably going to read a lot of historical fantasy. I know I do. Please look at those list of books I just showed you. So I think that's very important to note that these are also like genre. This is also a genre that is going to have a return on investment, which is absolutely a point of thought, maybe not for the author, but for the publisher. And you have to remember that the publishing house is a part of this conversation. An author can write as many stories as they want, but at the end of the day, the publishing house is going to consider whether or not they're going to get their money back when they buy that manuscript from the author. When they pay that licensing fee, they are trying to figure out if this is going to pay back, right? This is why authors don't get paid royalties until their advance is paid off. Until the publishing house has like made enough money to cover the advance, made the advance back. Let's say it's a 10 grand advance. Okay, cool. So books are being sold at, let's say 13 quid, right? And they're being sold to the bookstores at 10 quid. The publisher is making like 3 quid a book. And then that 3 quid then gets divvied up into like the money, let's say 1 quid, like 2 quid that goes into the salaries for all the employees who worked on this book, right? The editor who still works there, the publishing agent who still works there, all that kind of stuff. You know, let's say, but that's how that works, right? That's €1 per book going into the sort of like spreadsheet that says how much money have they made back in the advance, right? Because that's what they're really trying to do, is they're trying to make back that advance pool. They're trying to refill their advance pool so that then they can, give an advance to another author, and be like, here's your 10 grand. Like, that's what they're doing. It's not a Ponzi scheme because they're paying people up front. They're out the 10 grand, right? But they are not going to give you that €1 until they've refilled that 10 grand hole, right? Which again, fair enough. They need that pot, that pot of gold to give to other authors for their advances, right? They need that money. But that is why authors can write whatever they want, but publishers are always going to consider, am I going to make my advance back? So you always have to consider that these are really popular genres. These books are going to make that advance back. And it's almost guaranteed that they'll make the advance back. Again, it's popular genre, and it's a delicate like balance between oversaturation and feeding a market, and so you see this a lot with like certain types of romantic books. And again, I love romance novels, and again, not me shitting on romance novels. I'm not a misogynist like that. My God. I'm not a misogynist like that. Come on, guys. Come on. No. I love romance novels. I read romance novels all the time. I watched Bridgerton yesterday because I had a migraine. Like, leave me alone. That genre like had a huge flood of books come in. Romance and romantic had a huge flood of books come in that really used that really relied on tropes, and you found a lot of people like not liking them, or like finding them shallow, like too shallow to even be like a read for fun. Because I am absolutely going to be an advocate for both reading for fun and also reading for like to big brain things, right? Now, I find a lot of fun out of big braining things. So I've always, every single time I read a book, I've read it as like, okay, what can I pick apart about this author and their worldviews and their philosophies? Like, what's a message this author's trying to tell me? What's a subliminal here? Because I think that's fun. And also, as a writer, that's what I'm doing. I'm absolutely just like trying to like, shh, go, come on, pay attention, pay attention, bitch. Like, that's absolutely what I'm doing as an author. And so, like, I'm pretty ham-fisted with, I'm gonna be so for real. Um, I think it's fun. I always go into books reading like that because I think it's fun, but not everyone thinks that's fun. God, no. I especially do that with like epic fantasy and stuff like that. I don't do it as much with like romantasy because I'm generally gonna read romantasy because I want to read romantasy. But if I'm reading something more like Child of the Gods. Most of these books here I read in that fashion. Let's look at what's directly behind me. The Hot Wax here. Hot Wax here. I would read for Hot Wax here. I would read for thought process. You know, because I can trust that ML Rio is going to try to tell me something, right? Um, you know what I mean? Um, the Undead Complex here. Again, when I read this, I absolutely read it one because Courtney is my friend, so I know a lot about them, and so I could see a lot of them in this book because me and Courtney are friends. But also, I could tell what Courtney was trying to tell me, a reader, with this book because I went into it being like, okay, there is going to be something here that is trying to be told. So I find that fun, but I didn't go into Not for the Faint of Heart reading for any like deep philosophical meaning. One, because these books, even if when they have a message, which again this book does, again, romantasy is not trying to make you work for it. Generally, they're not going to try to make you work for it. Legends and Lattes didn't make me work for it. Like, these books didn't, like, romantasy is much too busy trying to like get you invested in these like love stories to make you work for what's going on and work for the message that's trying to be told here, right? You find these books, and there was a huge flood, and it flooded the market, and it really, I think, has turned people off from romantasy, which is so sad because it's such a good genre. It's so good. I love romance, and I love fantasy, and I love fantasy romance, romantasy. I love it. I think it's so fun. But it really turned people off from the genre because it was flooded with tropey nonsense, tropey garbage that was just like, that had no substance on its own. Which again, people need to make shitty art in order to make good art. Shitty art is important. Make shitty art. I'm the first person to tell you that. But the problem comes is that publishers were not like being like, this needs some work. This is structurally a little weak. A little weak. And also like, and again, this is not the fault of like self-publishing, right? Um, Self-publishing as it stands is a great thing. And most likely I will end up being self-published because I cannot be fucking arsed about when I've eventually finished my manuscript. A manuscript. I cannot be fucking arsed. But like, you still have to hire an editor. You still have to do all these things so that your book is good, right? Um, but also that means that self-publishing also means that there are fewer eyes generally checking your work, which means that you're less likely to have someone who's like, hey, this is a little weak. Because the thing is, a lot of these books would hold up a lot of water as fanfic, and I would probably read them if you gave me like two fictional characters that I already knew, from other media, and we're like, here's a fanfic, eat up. I would probably just be like, yes, right? But the problem is with that is I already know those characters, and I'm already emotionally invested in those characters, and that's the thing that I think a lot of people have like with the romantasy have like jumped on this bandwagon of like, okay, I'm gonna have this setting that I know very surface level, so I don't have any substance to the story, to the setting, right? Strike one. And then I'm going to use all these fun tropes that are really good when they're like, when they just happen to happen, right? When I was reading Not for the Faint of Heart, I didn't realize it was a one bed scene until they got into the bed, because it was so glossed over that it was one bed. Again, also, it's lesbians, so it's also like less of a big deal, you know. But it was less. But it was. But it like it wasn't even getting into the bed that was a problem for them. It was the fact that they woke up cuddling that was the problem, right? That was like for them, and I thought that was great. One, but also it meant I wasn't like fucking bonked over that. How? Um, I hit myself a lot harder than I intended to. But it meant I wasn't fucking beaten over the head, and I didn't touch myself that time because I didn't want to do that again. But it meant I wasn't beaten over the head with the this is a one bedroom situation. There's one bed. There's only one bed in the room. There's one room left, and there's one bed. Like it didn't fucking beat me over the head with that concept, right? These Some of these romantic novels are absolutely beating you over the head with it, and that stands in fanfic. Because fanfic, you don't need to build up a character. Because everyone already knows these characters. Everyone who's reading this already knows who they are. So really, I always think of a fanfic as, one, a great way of exercising storytelling. Because oftentimes you don't have to do the heavy lifting of setting work and character work and all that kind of stuff. You can just kind of yammer on about a story, tell a story. But also, dialogue, characterization, environmental storytelling even, because again, if you don't have to tell me a lot of like the base level things, a lot of the surface level base level things, or like some of the like surface level, like the just below the surface level details, I'm not going to be bothered at all by the fact that all you're giving me is like implication and just like, right, because like you still need to tell me some things about a character or show me some things about a character like very obviously when you're like introducing us to you to a character, because otherwise it means nothing. Those little drops of like information will mean fuck all, you know. And so I've seen this a lot with like romantasy, and also like people who are like reviewing, you know, romantasy and stuff like that. It's advertised a lot with tropes and stuff like that. Um, but again, it feeds off of that romanticization of the medieval period. Because again, a lot of these romantic novels are set during pseudo-medieval, because chivalry, and also because the glamour of castles and shit. Um, which if you've ever been to like a normal castle, not one of the big ones, just a normal one, just a normal one. There's a lot of them in Ireland. Just a normal one. They're not all that. They're not all that. You gotta go to some of the big, big, big ones. You gotta go to, like, like, come on. No, 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 no. If you go to the castle of a duchy, you're gonna be a bit disappointed. They're not all Buckingham Palace and Versailles. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Uh, it's that kind of like romanticization that's like, and it happens in like all kinds of media forms. Again, Latin lattes. This is kind of D&D-ish, Faeruni, kind of thing. Like it's popular in D&D as well. And there's a bigger reason for that beyond like the Victorian romanticization of it, you know, because of course, obviously, the Victorian romanticization of the period puts it into our like forefront of our head, right? Specifically Western, white European medieval period, because like during the medieval period, like the Islamic Empire was off like discovering calculus. Like they were like doing math, doing cool ass math and chemistry, and like figure out new ways to forge things. And like in Europe, things were being cool, really cool things were being done too. Part of the Victorian romanticization and demonization of the medieval period was calling it the Dark Ages. The printing press was invented during the medieval period. The Renaissance is arguably during the medieval period. What do you mean it was the Dark Ages? Just because a plague came through, there's a plague coming through every fucking 100 years. There's a plague coming through every 100 years, give or take. They're not special, and neither are you. like, so a lot of it is also like, yeah, like The printing press was invented. Like, it was not the Dark Ages. It was not gritty and evil and awful and nothing happened. So much stuff was invented. So much stuff was invented. Modern brewing techniques were invented. So many of our, like, European recipes date back to that period. What do you mean? It was the Dark Ages. Fuck off. And again, this is another thing that I know, and this is something that is more of a problem in film and in TV and movies than it is in books. Books often get this right. And I think this is because authors have, while they are not dedicated to being accurate, because again, it's fiction, they are very dedicated to being honest. Much more than a screenwriter would be. Medieval period was super colorful. Super, super colorful. Um, yeah, like clothes were colorful. The world was colorful. You see it a lot in The Witcher 3, because that's the Witcher game that I've played the most and have. Um, like you see this a lot in The Witcher 3. Like Eskel's bright red gambeson, and I will put photos here of what that looks of these things, what they look like. But like Eskel's bright red gambeson. Um, let's see, the the flags of Redania and Nilfgaard and Toussaint. Like they're bright, colorful. Dandelion's outfits, bright, colorful. It's because dyeing stuff has been being people have been dyeing clothes and fabric for decades, centuries, millennia. Like people have always been like, I wonder if I could boil this plant with this fiber, what will happen? I know about this a lot about this because my mom wants to dye yarn. My mom really wants to dye yarn. So I know about like all of this sort of like natural plant fiber stuff. I almost bought a book on it when I was at the Knit and Stitch show last year. But things have been dyed with plants, fungi, um, bark, flowers, leaves, all kinds of things. Even foodstuffs, food scraps. You can get a really nice purple dye from red onion scraps. Um, really nice purple dye. But people have been doing that for like a long time. A long time. Since we've had fabric, we've had people dyeing fabric and weaving fabric and making colorful bits with fabric. Like it's a whole thing. People love their colors, right? What colors were popular and what colors were expensive is, of course, you know, depends on the resource. Like indigo was always worth a queen's fortune, because indigo in Europe anyway had to be imported in. It's imported in from Asia, indigo flowers. Um, as well as the method for dyeing with indigo. It's imported in. It's an Asian thing. Both the Indian subcontinent and um, Eastern, Eastern and Northern Asian. Like it's a Asian thing to dye with indigo because that was the flower they had. So you always end up with purple being worth a king's ransom. To the Norse, pink was worth a king's ransom because of the particular flower that had to be used to dye things pink. And I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. I'm so sorry. But pink was worth a fortune. If you could weave with gold or silver thread, my God, even more. It was that kind of thing. Like, the world was colorful. People were colorful. The statues were not made of white marble. I'm referring to the Greco-Roman period here. They were painted, colorful and full of life. And that has been true this whole time. Like, the whole time. Like, people have always, like, archaeologists and historians are always like, wow, they were so unenlightened and sad. This is less so a thing now. It's also because white men are no longer the only people doing archaeology and history. Who said that? Who said that? But additionally, like, just the attitude in these fields have changed regarding you know, like sort of reconstruction, essentially. People are now much more like are desire much more to recover not just the item, but its original form. People aren't just going, well, this is how it was found, so therefore it must be just like this, right? Um, again, technology is also improving. So again, like we wouldn't have been able to know that a lot of these Greco-Roman statues would have been painted because we wouldn't have been able to test them for paint residue. Now we can though, so we know that. You know, same thing with like dinosaurs having feathers, right? And the people who hold on to the fact that they don't, and it's like, no, they do. We've seen them. They've been fossilized. We have feathers. We have fucking feathers, guys. And they were colorful. Yeah, we have the fucking proteins that make the structural color. Come on, it's not that hard. But people cling to it because they have like an idea in their head. And that idea in their head is what makes this genre so popular, I think. You know, fantasy set in a pseudo-medieval, like everyone's got an idea in their head of what that means. You know, everyone's got an idea in their head of like what the medieval world looks like. You know, it's full of ladies and lords and knights and chivalry. Also, full of poverty, farming, tragedy, but also full of just fun. You know, people were happy. People were colorful. You know, it was like people were people. People have always been people. The reason why I think the medieval period specifically is always picked out has more to do with the way religion was perceived at the time. So we have a large amount of, like, obviously Catholicism and also the Protestant Reformation at the time. Also, these cookies, these are homemade. These are um, coffee and chocolate. They're very good. So obviously we have the expansion of the church and the Protestant Reformation. But we also have a lot of remnant paganism. You see this all the time, especially like in rural areas across Europe. In Ireland generally, Ireland is like notoriously pagan for a Catholic country. Like even as more and more of Ireland becomes more atheist, I mean, we're still like lighting a candle, you know, and like avoiding the fairy forts, you know. Ireland just culturally pays a lot of lip service to religion in a way that is very specific. A lot of these places were definitely still very pagan in a lot of ways. And that makes all the difference because the pagan gives a connection in the mind to magic. And that's what a lot of these fantasy worlds hinge on. Magic. The unknown, the unexplained, gives you people a lot of wiggle room to work with, right? The humors. People believed in magic anyway at the time. Alchemy, which was really chemistry, but they didn't know that yet. You know, like all these things come together to create a setting base that gives you a lot of wiggle room, a lot of places to go. Like the class hierarchy system gives you a lot of room to work with there, right? The ordainment by God gives you a lot to work with in regards to, well, what God? Capital G God? Just a God? You know, what about changing how that works? What if that's literal? Like, it gives, like, a lot of wiggle room for a lot of these concepts of, like, inserting magic here, inserting magic there, because these people believed in something else, something greater, to such a degree that it impacted their way of life, impacted their laws and the way that they looked at the world, like, very fundamentally. And so it gives you a lot more to work with there. Modern fantasy, I've found, has to and again, there's a lot of things that aren't explained in the modern day, but you really have to work with science and you have to know how science works, at least on some level, in order for modern fantasy to work, because you have to be able to coexist with science. You have to be able to coexist with physics. You know, some of my favorite like concepts for modern magic systems are genuinely just, here's a new particle. You know, here's a new type of energy particle. Yay! Um because that would fit in with the current knowledge base, right? But that requires a certain level of knowledge that doesn't exist just generally in the zeitgeist, and also isn't readily understandable by a quick Google search. Quantum physics is hard. Medieval history, you can read a couple articles and you have something of an idea enough, right? An idea enough that you could start writing anyway. That you could build your magic system. You can do all your detailed work later. You can figure out how a printing press works later. You don't need to know how a printing press works right now. Come on, calm down, calm down. And that's, like, I think the biggest reason. I think this is also the big reason why, like, so much fantasy is generally set during a feudal time, or something akin to that. Like, a lot of fantasy is set during the dynastic periods in China. I have a lot of light novels. They were all sort of set during the various dynastic periods. Um, because it gives you a lot of wiggle room, and people practiced cultivation or said they practiced cultivation and all these kinds of things. Like, people were mystics back then, and people had, like, sects and cults and stuff like that you can work with, that you can, like, build off of, build off those concepts. Same thing in Europe, right? And it's about the zeitgeist. Like, we have Vikings and we have the medieval period in our heads. Who doesn't love a Ren fair, right? Who doesn't love a Ren fair? You know, um, the Da Vinci Code, right? Set during the, like, about medieval and Renaissance paintings, like, about, like, medieval Christianity and Renaissance paintings. Like, this is, like, it's the kind of thing that sticks in people's heads. People like it. People find it interesting, and there is something to say about, who came first, chicken or the egg, right? I think it all does go back to Tolkien, and Tolkien being like, I'm gonna write about my huge ancient version of this world with elves, with my OCs. They're elves. They're elves. I'm gonna write about them, and this is their Middle Ages. This is this period, and I'm gonna take all those aesthetics and I'm gonna use them, right? He's obviously, like, the forefather of this kind of concept. He used it because it was good for talking about war, because wars were always breaking out, between various fiefdoms, like, kind of just a thing. People just went to war a lot, and so worked really well. And also allowed him to avoid using certain technology, which he didn't want to use technology, and it makes sense. But again, he was trying to write a history of the world, an alternative history, and using something that uses a lot of these medieval stylings. And I was like, okay, this would be their medieval period. Their version of a medieval period. Yeah, that'll work. Yeah, and then I'll have them coming back to new things being built, and it's weird. Because it was weird when I came home. And there were factories everywhere. It was so weird. It's that kind of thing of, like, being able to talk about, like, this huge change in technology, which was brought about by a industrial revolution, makes the medieval period really good for Tolkien's purpose. Because Tolkien's purpose with Lord of the Rings was absolutely to sort of talk about was to talk about the industrial revolution in England after World War One. But there have been industrial revolutions throughout history, right? The printing press was part of one. You know, and so it's really important that we acknowledge that it is acknowledged that the reason why Tolkien picked it is because he could fit an industrial revolution into it, because it made sense for an industrial change, right? Which is, at the end of the day, why we have so much medieval fantasy, because Tolkien used it as an allegory, used an industrial revolution in a medieval world. It's an allegory for the industrial revolution in England after the World War, after the Great War. And that I think is the like final like starting point for all of this. I think all of these other reasons like are why it was popularized and sort of glommed onto, but at the end of the day, it was Tolkien and him making a pseudo medieval fantasy novel, fantasy series, being the forefather of the modern Western European epic fantasy novel. I think that at the end of the day is the starting point. You can say all you want about actual medieval period, about the romanticization of the period by Victorians, by us, modern folk, the demonization by Victorians and modern folk. You can say whatever you like about that. You can say whatever you like about, access to resources and stuff like that. We have tons of resources from the Renaissance. Not a lot of shit. Not a lot of shit's written during the Renaissance. All I can think of is The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. Right? So it's not about access to sources. There's plenty of sources for that, right? We've got paintings, we've got letters, we've got all kinds of stuff. Just doesn't speak to people the same way, right? Doesn't have that same connection to paganism, you know? Doesn't have that same connection to Tolkien, to epic fantasy. It doesn't have that same connection to simpler times, almost, you know? That, I think people really like. Also, generally doesn't have as much connection to, like, which is stupid. What I'm about to say is very stupid. It doesn't have as much of a connection to kings and queens. This is because we know so much about the various vassal lords of various kings and queens during the Renaissance. We know so much about various vassal lords of various kings and queens. A lot of times when people want to write fantasy, they want to write fantasy about common folk. They want to write something that is an allegory for the working man, the working class. Whether they intend it that way or not, or whether they butcher it or not. That's what they want to do. And so you have to go with something that we know a lot more about the common folk with, which is, of course, serfdom in England. And this has been a very waffly video. I'm going to cut so much shit down, I can already promise you that. That is all I've got for today. I hope you enjoyed me just waffling on about the medieval period. And like books set during like a pseudo-medieval period and why I think it's cool and interesting and fun. If you want to hear me talk about like whole genres like this again, let me know. Give me ideas. I love yapping, guys. It's so much fun. It is truly so much fun. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, do all the things, so you can see more of my videos. Again, my link tree is in the description. Go follow me on Instagram. I have been baking sourdough a lot, so if you want to see me at 3 a.m. almost every single night baking something new, including presumably more of these cookies, at some point, please give me a follow over there. I promise I'm super nice. I am so caring. I am so lovely. And yeah. See y'all soon. Ta!